Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Al-Anon Big Book Recovery Qualification meeting. Today is, what is today? Today is March 1st, 2026. We are at 4 p.m. In the Eastern Standard Time. My name is Lisa Kay. I am a recovered Al-Anon and I'm your moderator for this evening. In order to set the tone for this meeting, I ask that we bow our heads in a few moments of silent prayer and meditation, followed by the Serenity Prayer. Prayer. God, grant me the serenity
Serenity.
to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thy will, not mine, be done. Okay, this meeting is a speaker meeting, and we are grateful to have Joy here to share her story about what she used to be like, what happened, and what she's like now. There will be a short period set aside for question and answers in case anyone has any, and that will occur after her share. Okay, Joy, I am now going to ask you to unmute and I'll turn it over to you. And you've already told me that you would like a reminder at about 5 minutes prior to the question and answer time.
Okay. Yep. Great.
Okay, all right. And so that will be at about 15 minutes before the meeting is over. Thank you
Okay.
so much, Joy, for doing this. I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa. Um, Hi everybody. My name is Joy J. I'm a very grateful member of the Al-Anon family groups. And God started to work on the obsession that I have around my alcoholic loved one well, I have it in my book. What does it say right here? December 3rd, 2017. So just a few months ago, I celebrated 8 years. And for that, I feel such a deep gratitude for the principles, as the 12 steps, the principles which led me to this power that relieved this obsession that I had that I couldn't stop of the alcoholic. And so now I get to practice these principles. And I'm just going to take a minute, just maybe do another moment of silence, followed by the set aside prayer, just to recenter and feel a little rushed. So I think a prayer would um, help me get into a good headspace with God. So God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, this book, my illness, these steps, and especially about you, God, so that I might have an open mind and a new experience with all these things. Help me see the truth. Amen. Okay, so I'm just going to share about, it talks about on page 59, and I'm going to be talking about and going through and referencing the AA Big Book. And that's just the literature that I use to recover. That is where these steps are located and how to do the steps. So that's what I was encouraged to do by my sponsor, was to work the steps out of the original 12-step document, again, the AA Big Book. And so the book tells us on page 59 how we share our stories. It says our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. So when I think about, and it wasn't so much like all the crazy stuff that I did in my Al-Anonism. I mean, that is part of my story, but it's about really about who was I, and that once we begin 12 step, we actually learn, and we're supposed to learn. A lot of people don't ever hear this part of the message, but they make it very clear in the beginning of the big book that when they start introducing step 3, that my real problem isn't that I can't stop obsessing over the alcoholic. My real problem is that I obsess over them to deal with my selfishness and to deal with the spiritual malady that I have. And so, as part of my story, it's not about just all the strange things that I did around trying to control and manipulate and manage the alcoholic. It's about who was I on the inside? You know, what was it? How did the selfishness really manifest in me? And so if I think back to when I was a child, and not everybody has the same story, and that's why it's really important that people understand when you hear my story. Just because it doesn't sound like your story, it doesn't mean that you don't qualify to be here. What qualifies us to be here is that we identify with step 1. And I'll kind of read that real quick, just to, because as I go through my story, I like to point out, well, what did step 1 look like in my story? And all the steps in the AA Big Book are listed on page 59. So step 1 for the Al-Anon is actually the same for the alcoholic, because I obsess over the alcoholic who obsesses over alcohol. So I need to understand that I'm powerless also over how alcohol affects the alcoholic. But step 1 says we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. And so what that means for me as an Al-Anon is that I'm powerless over alcohol, because again, I can't control how alcohol affects the alcoholic. I also can't control my thinking. For me, it's like once I start an obsession around the alcoholic and what I can do to try to fix them, for me, it's almost, there's almost a runaway train in my thinking. But what's more important is that second part of step 1, my life has become unmanageable. My life is unmanageable because I keep going back to an obsession that's hurting me, that I cannot manage the decision to stay stopped from this obsession. And that's what qualifies me for needing to have a spiritual experience that's going to solve my problem. My problem at this time is, in the very beginning, is my obsession I have over the alcoholic. And so I grew up in an alcoholic household. It was at times a very volatile environment. Um, and I was always an awkward kid, and I'm pretty sure that even regardless of what my upbringing was, if I think that I had the perfect parents and a normal background, and I actually certainly, compared to a lot of people, had it better than a lot of people. I had a roof over my head, I was fed, I was taken care of. But I was a very strange child in that I never felt comfortable in my own skin. There was always something that fell off with me. I had a really hard time fitting in with others. I was always really inside my head a lot, which for an Al-Anon is not a good place to be. Probably with anybody that needs a 12-step program, inside our head is pretty much the worst place that we can be. And a lot of that inner dialogue happening that would always tell me that I was a loser, I was never good enough. It didn't matter what I did, I wouldn't be good enough. And so, and these are some of my earliest memories, not really being sure what to do to be happy, because I always felt like something was wrong. And as far as the family I grew up in, it's there's a lot of things that go on in a household with alcoholics that might not maybe go on maybe along with other people or other families. There's a lot of secrecy. There is a lot of people really caring about outside appearances. So it was important to my family members that I look the part, that I look normal, that I look like there's, nothing to see here type of things. And because I was such an awkward kid, it it was hard, that was hard for me to blend because I was such an insecure child. I had a really difficult time in school. I had a difficult time making friends. I was bullied quite a bit in school. And I remember this one incident that I'd basically been jumped by a bunch of kids on the playground, and my mom or my stepdad had to come pick me up, and they were just upset because they're just like, it's basically like, what's wrong with you that this keeps happening? And I know it was from, they're trying to do the best that they can, but it's for fear that, this is going to make them look bad, my parents look bad. And that's what they're reacting from. So I carried this stuff with me through my childhood, watching, living in a house where things were not, we would have different people come to the house, kind of strange experiences happen. There was one point, I was later, maybe around 10, and there was a domestic violence kind of situation at our home, and my parents got put in jail, and we had to kind of get taken care of by the neighbors. And that really, for a time after that, kind of straightened my parents out a little bit, and they started attending 12-step meetings and going to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't know anything about the program. I didn't really understand what the program was at that time. I just know that, hey, my parents had to go to all these meetings. And actually, things did get better when they would do that. And so I was one of these kids who I grew up basically in the back room of 12-step meetings, watching my parents try to get sober. And this is in the mid 90s. And there were all these other kids there too. And it was just kind of a funny scene. This was back when they had smoking meetings. And I still like can smell the room to this day, that this meeting hall, and everybody was smoking, and you could barely even walk in the room. Like, it was so thick with smoke. And things did get better for a time. And I don't know if my parents ever really worked the steps. I'm not really sure if they were introduced to that or how they did it. They have eventually, it didn't last, which is unfortunately with alcoholism pretty common. But I'm here still just this awkward child and really just struggling in the world. And as I kind of start to become a teenager, I get into high school and start to come into my own a little bit, only because I was able to get a car. My parents did buy me a car. And I basically was like a ride for everybody. And so I started making friends, but and it wasn't really the best crowd. I was hanging out with the wrong crowd, but it was kind of like Bill talks about. I always think about Bill in the beginning of his story when he talks about, like, I have arrived. Like, that's how I felt, because it was really the first time in my life that I had felt a part of something, that I was like, oh, I have friends and they like me and they're inviting me to do things. And it was like, really, because as Al-Anons were like big time approval seekers, and it was just like total, I was getting ease and comfort, right? Because people liked me. and they wanted to do things with me. And during this time, I did a lot of outside issues and I did a lot of really, really dumb things. I ended up with in police custody more than once. And people would look on the, and actually, I think during one of those, it was mandated that I go to an AA meeting, and I went and I had to have something signed. And to the outside, people would say she has a drinking problem. But what would happen with me at the end of the day is that I could stop. I didn't like I get to a certain point, and this is really more in my 20s, I get into a certain point where I'm like, you know what? I don't like feeling hungover all the time. I don't like the way it makes me feel. I don't like staying up late. And I was able, that whole partying lifestyle that I did, I was able to just stop it on my own. I didn't have to have a spiritual experience to stop. And so I definitely had probably a lot of the signs of a hard drinker, but I was able to stop. But what I wasn't able to stop was this obsession that I had over the alcoholic. And so, and I couldn't, it was very hard to see, especially through my teens and my 20s. And so I'd get in relationships with men, and usually always the wrong guy. And I used to always think it was a coincidence that every guy that I dated was an addict. And it wasn't. It was just kind of what I was comfortable with because I got ease and comfort from trying to control this other person and making, seeing if I could get them sober, if I could fix them, if I had a project, their erratic lifestyle, it was like a high for me. It kept me from thinking, that voice inside me that always told me that I was a loser. It got quieted when I was obsessing about this other person or their drinking or what they were doing. And so I carried this with me. And that's the thing about alcoholism, is that we do know that it is a family illness, and that even if someone is not a chronic alcoholic that's in an alcoholic family, that they'll still exhibit the traits. And that was definitely me. And I really just lived life really full of fear all the time and making lots and lots of decisions based off fear. And I had had some exposure to religion and church. And that's really, at one point, it was kind of some of the things that I used, probably through my late 20s, early 30s. I'm like, I need to go back to church. That's why my life is such a mess. But early on, and what my kind of upbringing, it was basically that I had to go to church. I didn't want to go to church. It was really the forced religious scenario, which later on, kind of brings resentment as to, well, I didn't want to go, I was forced to go, blah, blah, blah. And the thing about my childhood too is I actually had a lot of great things going on in my childhood, but those things were always really hard for me to see. I couldn't see that I should be grateful I have a roof over my head. My mom was very involved. She always wanted to have horses. We were always really, really involved with horse activities. I'm a third generation horseman. My grandfather had horses. Like, it's just kind of something that was passed down through our family. And so I had really cool experiences that we got to own horses and we got to go out and ride every day. And I grew up in Arizona. I grew up in Phoenix, but I never had when I was really young, I didn't have horses at home, but we had a barn, we boarded them. And so I had a lot of cool experiences, and my mom would pay for us to go to horse shows and get riding lessons and all this stuff. And I didn't, I didn't appreciate it. And I really held a grudge to her, really for a long time, really up until I came into program in 2017. I had a big time resentment with my mom because I thought she was a drunk. I thought she didn't want to get her life together. And she exposed my sister and I to kind of some things we shouldn't have been exposed to. And I held a lot of resentment for that. But the thing was, it wasn't hurting her, it was hurting me. And so what happened, I graduate high school and I decide that I want to be a horse trainer, and which is really what I'd always kind of known that's what I wanted to do. And so I immediately kind of jump into working for trainers, and it's very hard work, very labor intensive work, very long days. You're not getting weekends off. You're getting one day off a week, and sometimes 12-hour days. But when I was young, I thought it was super fun. But I would also get really like codependent with my bosses. It was like the approval seeking, like I had to be the best employee, I had to be the favorite. I would bend over backwards so that I got all the praises, and I had to do the most work. And a lot of times, kind of what I realize now is that what I was doing by kind of being such a hard worker and trying to be everything to everybody is I was really running away from my feelings, is something I've kind of recently discovered, kind of that not being able to sit still stuff. And so my jobs would kind of like have similar types of, it was like a parallel between my jobs and my relationships, in that I would stay in jobs too long because I didn't want to step on toes, or I wouldn't leave when I should have left a job because I was afraid people wouldn't like me. I was, in a lot of fear. And the same with my relationships. I would be with these guys I had no business being with, and they would always leave me, which was the other thing. It's like if there's something that's like not a hint as to like there's something wrong with me, like I'm dating the worst quality men, these men that were um nobody has business being with them, and like they were leaving me. And so it's like that's a clue that there's something wrong with me, not maybe everybody else. But as I get through my 20s, so I'm kind of just really distracting myself with work, really distracting myself with relationships with alcoholic men. And I start to have a lot of mental health issues in my 20s, and a lot of things that, thoughts about taking my own life, that type of stuff, a lot of depression. And so I start taking medication for that. And I remember I was relieved at the time because I was like, oh, this is why I'm so, I can't be happy. This is why there's something inside me that always feels different. And that hadn't changed. Like that little girl who just felt like she was a loser, like that never left me. There was things I could do to kind of quiet it a little bit, but it never left. And so when I get on into psychiatric medication, it made me so that I wasn't depressed anymore, but it was hard for me to feel things in a way. It did kind of numb me out a bit, but that underlying unhappiness was still there. And so I spent pretty much all of my 20s really using a lot of external things to try to fix an inside problem, because I can't see yet. Going back to step one, I'm powerless over alcohol, or I'm powerless over the alcoholic, my obsession I have. I was definitely exhibiting signs of the loss of control, that it was really hard to control my thinking, and it was hard for me to control the obsession. But what I couldn't see was that second part of step one, the unmanageability, and that I thought I still had a choice. I thought I could still somehow, um, the book tells us we have this idea. Let me see if I'm not on the right page, but we have some idea that we'll somehow beat the game. And I thought that I could somehow beat the game, and that I could have, if I could just get the right relationship, if I could get the right job, if I could get the right car, if I could, have the perfect body, that all of a sudden my life would be okay. And the thing is that I did achieve really good things in my career, but it was never like good enough for me. It was like I couldn't enjoy that moment and I never felt fulfilled ever. It was like I would make an accomplishment and it was like on to the next thing. And so some of the things that I tried to fix some of these personality problems I was having and codependency around the alcoholic was I did therapists. And all of these are like really good things. And I'm not saying they're bad things. I'm just saying I heard somebody speak today and they were talking about motives, and that basically everything that we do is going to come down to a motive. Is the motive a selfish motive? Or is it because it's God's motive? Because I want to do things to increase what I can do for God. And so when I think about those motives, it's like I was doing therapy and I was taking medication, I was seeing psychics, and I was doing all these things because I was in fear. And because I thought that if I could accomplish something through these things, that I would somehow feel whole and feel satisfied. And I never did. And I'm trying to think of some of the other things I did. Well, I mean, I'll get into that in a sec too. There was other stuff that I did around trying to kind of control and manage the alcoholic, all my relationships. And I mean, I was abused, I mean, physically and mentally in bad relationships with men. And and sometimes that's hard, especially as sponsors, because and it's really, really common that this happens where people are in these bad relationships. And I remember when I went through a fifth step with my sponsor, my first sponsor, that we talked about this, and it's like it's not I did the wrong thing because I was setting myself up to be harmed because I was with people that I shouldn't have been with. And so when I look at, oh, I have a resentment towards this man because he did this, um, I really have to look at, well, I put myself in that situation. Why was I in the company of these men that clearly had signs that I should not be dating them, and I was. So now if I fast forward to my late 20s, I met the man that's now my husband. And I was also like, could never be alone. Like I kept jumping from like relationship to relationship. And I had a really kind of a man I was dating for a couple years, and he had introduced me to a friend of his who they had met drinking. And when this relationship ended, then I called this guy up and I texted him. I'm like, well, what are you doing? Because I thought he had all the goods. He had a nice car, he had a good job, he had a nice house. And again, my motives were not good. And so him and I started dating. He'd later become my husband. And but he was an alcoholic. But he was different in that a lot of the men I had dated prior were really volatile when they were drinking, and he wasn't like this. And he was actually like the life of the party when he was drinking. Everybody wanted to be his friend and da 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 da. And he didn't drink. When I first started dating him, I was like, well, he doesn't drink that much. Like, it's not that big of a deal. He has his job. It's like he has his life together. This is okay. But what happened is because he ended up being a chronic alcoholic, and this is what happens every time, is that it's not a matter of if it's going to get worse, it's a matter of when. And so as he started to progress in his disease of alcoholism, I started to progress in my illness and well as well because I couldn't stop obsessing about the consequences. And it did get to a point where he did lose his job and we didn't know how we were going to pay the bills. And even when I married him, I knew that it wasn't the right, there was something off about the relationship. And so when I would again get into a fifth step with a sponsor and she would help me see, because I'd have all this resentment against my husband, like he's a drunk, he did this, he did that, blah, 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 all our money's gone. She'd be like, well, didn't you marry him? It's like, were there any red flags? And it's like, well, yeah, there was. So, getting back to what they talk about in step 3 in the book, that our troubles are of our own making, right? And so, kind of getting into the part of my story where, I've kind of talked about what it was like, living in my illness and my obsession around the alcoholic, now to kind of get into what happened to bring me to program or to Al-Anon. My husband's alcoholism was a disaster. He had started treatment centers, rehabs, detoxes, kind of became the norm for us. Sometimes I was living at home, sometimes I wasn't because I'd get mad at him and I'd leave and go to my sister's. And I remember he was helping me at a work thing and he was so drunk, like he, was passing out there. And it was just like it was an awful time. And I think about all the things that I was doing to try to manage his sobriety, because he swore up and down. He's like, I'm going to go to meetings. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And I didn't believe him. I would like check his phone. I would, he would always go golf. He would always golf and he would drink a lot. He would, while he was golfing. And so like he'd get home and I would like check his golf bag for like empty liquor bottles. And I'd take him to meetings. I'd call rehabs for him and all these things that it was like all I was thinking about. And I was neglecting people around me. I was neglecting my job because I was so worried about him all the time. And I didn't really know how to deal with life at that time. And so so what it looked like kind of prior to me coming into Al-Anon, I always like to read the bedevilments because it's not just about the obsession. It's because some people have the impression that when they come to Al-Anon, it's like, well, I'm going to come to Al-Anon and they're going to show me like how to control my loved one's drinking. And I luckily never had that. I kind of knew what Al-Anon was, but I know some people don't. And they think, well, the only problem in my life is that my loved one can't stop drinking. And when I look at my life, it wasn't just my husband's drinking that was like a disaster. Like my whole life was a disaster. And it says we were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. Ugh. We were a prey to misery and depression. Yes. We couldn't make a living. Yeah, I was struggling in my job. We had a feeling of uselessness. I've always had that feeling. We were full of fear. That was me nonstop. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. And it's like, that's what it was about. I had a living problem. I didn't have an alcoholic loved one problem. I had a living problem. And I didn't know how to live anymore. And so initially when I came into program, I came in for some other outside problems. Um, and I remember that I was ready to get honest with my sponsor that I found at the time about those things, but I was not ready to get honest with her about my Al-Anon problems, about this obsession I had at the time over my alcoholic husband. And so I basically wasn't ready to get honest. She wanted me to do some hard stuff. I didn't want to do it. She said, basically told me, hey, call me, when you're ready to follow direction. And that was really an awesome thing to do because it helped me so much that she didn't just hang on to me just so she could make herself feel good. That she said, you're not working the program. Call me when you're ready to. And I basically relapsed. And I'm so grateful she did that for me. And right around this same time, my husband had just gotten out of treatment and I wound up pregnant with our first child, with my first child. And I had just taken on a new job. I was pregnant and I was starting, like, I'd kind of gone through the steps with my sponsor and this other fellowship, and I'd started to kind of feel the psychic change and in my perspective changing. But like I said, I wasn't really getting honest. And so when when I went back out, it was like I was fine for a little bit, but it started to kind of slowly creep back in, kind of this spiritual malady. And the thing about the spiritual malady is it's really our real issue is the spiritual malady, and everybody has it to some degree. This spiritual sickness, everybody has it. The problem is, in people like us that are chronic, that the spiritual malady has to be addressed in order for someone like me to recover. So when I think about this place where I was at with my husband and obsessing over him, not ready to get honest with a sponsor, and I go back to step one and I start to feel those real true symptoms of step one in me. When I got dropped by a sponsor, I relapsed. I started thinking I knew, like I was starting to have panic attacks. I didn't want to go to work. I was worried about if my husband was drinking, and my life was really spiraling. And I finally got to a place where I could see my step one, my Al-Anon step one. So I'm powerless over alcohol. I was already exhibiting signs that I couldn't control, that it was really, really hard for me to control my obsession around the alcoholic and what they were doing. And then the unmanageability part where I could start to see that I didn't have a choice anymore whether or not I was going to start obsessing over what my husband was doing. I didn't have a choice anymore. And the thing is, even if it wasn't my husband, it would have been somebody else. It would have been some other relationship. It would have been my mom. It would have been my boss. Like this idea that, I can just leave the alcoholic and be okay and then everything's fine. Maybe that works for some people, but with me, I'll just pick it right back up with somebody else. And so I'm finally at a point where I'm really exhibiting the signs of my Al-Anonic step one. And it scared me because I was starting to become very spiritually sick again. Right about this time, I was about 9 months pregnant. And I called my first sponsor back. I'm like, oh my gosh, you were right. I'm a mess. Like, please take me back. And she was like, I'm going to refer you to somebody that has experience in Al-Anon. She's like, because you need Al-Anon badly. And so that's what I did. She hooked me up with a sponsor, an Al-Anon sponsor. And we went back through the steps. And she used the AA Big Book. I didn't really get hung up on literature. It really just came down to I knew that she was free of this obsession and I wasn't. And so I asked her for help. And so we went through the steps and we went through quickly. And then what started to happen was I started to work a program this time. And I actually did it because I was really convinced at this point that step one was my truth and that there were no other options for me. A lot of times when people kind of get through the work and fizzle out, a lot of it always goes back to step one. Like, am if I was convinced that I need to be here, I wouldn't balk at the work. And so my sponsor said jump, and I said how high? Like I just did it, and I made it like my life's mission to try to help people, and I was helping people pretty quickly. And the more that I started focusing on the actions of the program, the more that I stopped worrying about what my husband was doing because he was still not sober during this time. Again, I was about 9 months pregnant, and he had found a job. I was like, so, I was still in a lot of fear that he was going to lose his job, but I was working my program around it. I was finding people to sponsor. And what ended up happening was about 3 months after I came into recovery, he was, I finally was able to leave him alone and let God work in his life. And I was able to just back off and let him go do his thing. And actually, 3 months later to the day is my husband's sobriety date. It's actually on my birthday, my belly button birthday. It's such a weird thing, but this was such an insane time. So this was literally, he got sober 2 weeks before our son was born. It was on my belly button birthday. I had been in recovery exactly 3 months to the day. And it was just crazy. And I remember like we weren't even living together. He was living in sober living. And the first time like he was sober and we lived together was after we took our son home from the hospital. And it was such a crazy time. And actually it's just such a good reminder too, because him and I will talk about it sometimes and we forget like how insane that time was, like in our lives. Like I don't even know how we got through it. And like that's why it's important that we work with newcomers, is because if we don't have people that are fresh and raw, we forget what that obsession was like and what that life was like. And so we need newcomers and we need to hold them close to us because that's how we remember. Because when we get too far away, we stop remembering and then we start to kind of slowly take back control and the ego kind of starts playing. And the thing about ego is it's there and it's waiting. It's waiting for its time where it can, try to push God out. And so now what it kind of looks like now is that, my husband and I don't have a perfect life, but like we're still together. I'm almost convinced that if it weren't for Al-Anon, my husband and I would likely be divorced. I don't know that my husband, he's funny when I bring this up because I swear I don't know that he would have gotten sober without Al-Anon. And the thing is he might not stay sober. I don't know. I don't know what God has planned. But the thing is I also know that I'm going to be okay whether or not he ever drinks again. Like it'll be fine. And that I can be in gratitude that he's sober. And because sometimes I get nitpicky and I'm like, well, you don't work the same program I do. Like you guys aren't, your program's a little too mainstream for me and da da da. And at the end of the day, it's like maybe that works for him and that's fine. And maybe I need to be really, really, really head in the book because maybe I'm crazier than him. I don't know. I might be. And I know that I do have to work a rigorous program and that there's some Al-Anons out there that maybe don't have to work as rigorously as me, but I am just the type of person that God likes to make me really uncomfortable so that I have to do things. And so I still, as far as what do I do? Well, I still have to make sure that my ego isn't taking over in certain areas of my life. And I have to make sure that I'm giving everything to God, not just, well, it's like I'll give you my obsession I have around the alcoholic, but I'm not going to give you this.
5
That'll
minutes, Joy.
Thank you. That'll get me really sick really quick. And so yeah, I get to I get to be a parent. I get to show up for my kids. I've got two boys now, and I get to have a relationship with my husband. I was able to step away from my career to raise my babies, and I feel really grateful that I was able to do that because prior to program, like I was all about my job. Like you wouldn't be able to tell me that I couldn't do my job. And I was like, you know what? I'd rather be with my kids. And I feel really grateful I'm able to do that because I know there's not a lot of people that have that opportunity. And I get to have a bunch of ladies that I sponsor, and they really, really help me a lot. And I was able to make amends. I made amends to my mom, and now she gets to have a relationship with her grandkids, and I don't have to, leverage that over her and try to manipulate her. Um, I can just kind of love her for who she is, whether she can stay sober or not. And so, yeah, so many gifts that the program has given me that, and it's like if I'm not doing what I'm supposed to, like I fall on my butt and then I'm like, oh yeah, like I've got to do what I'm supposed to do. And it's it's such a blessing that I have a 10th step and I have a solution and that I can go through a hard time and know that, I can call my sponsor and she can help me see where I'm not getting right with God on something, because she's not my God. But when I'm having a hard time getting right with God, she's going to help put me back on track. And so I'm just so grateful for the Al-Anon family groups and that the program has been here. And the thing is, one day, like my kids might need this program. And so I have a really great appreciation for the principles, the 12 steps as laid out in the big book, because if they need it someday, like I want it to be there for them. Um, it, exactly as it was meant to be, not some watered down version. So if people say like, well, you're too extreme, I'm like, well, that's fine, but I want this program to be there for the people who need it. So that's kind of why I have a really great appreciation for the principles. So I think I will wrap up with that. So I feel so much gratitude that I was able to carry the message today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Joy. Oh, that was really good. Um, and it's really it's really, for us, I feel so much gratitude that we have people that are willing to share their stories and be vulnerable. And I'm going to invite you, Joy, to go ahead and leave your name and contact information if you don't mind
Sure.
doing that. You can put that on the chat. We do have about 5 minutes that we've set aside for questions for Joy about her share. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor for anyone who wants to just go ahead and unmute and or put your hand up, and I'll call on you either way. Anyone have a question for Joy? Dana. And make sure you unmute.
We can't hear you, Dan.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, there you go. There
Yeah.
you go.
Hey, Joy. Man, great story. Great job. And there, I learned so much I didn't know before. So I love how you say, I love how you mentioned that you want this for your children. And I mean, that's definitely, I want the same thing for loved ones. Um, I guess my question, and you mentioned your ego. And I mean and so I'm wondering with all of that, because sometimes when I think too much about that, I get real emotional. And I'm just wondering where, what you do with that and how you find balance and neutrality around that. So I guess that's what I'm asking. Sorry, it took me a little bit.
Around the ego. Does that mean around my ego? Yeah. Um, it's always been helping others. It's easy for me sometimes. What I've noticed kind of in kind of later recovery is that when I get uncomfortable, sometimes I'll think like, oh, it's an outside thing that's making me just uncomfortable. And that if I fix this outside thing, that then I'll be okay. And I even forget this, knowing what I'm supposed to do, knowing that if I help people, that I'm going to get the clarity I need. So the ego, I think in later recovery, and I know when I was early in recovery, the ego is so blatant and it's like the defects are so glaring that it's like it was so easy to see. Now, later recovery, I feel like the ego is like sneaky and that it's like not at your forefront because you're not acting the way that you used to act, but so the ego like attacks you in a different way. And so I have to look out for those things. Something that's helped me recently is, learning that it's okay to feel things. And because I spent a lot of time in my, kind of probably as a coping mechanism as growing up with alcoholics, I think I spent a lot of time, suppressing feelings and knowing that it's okay for me to feel things and to listen to my body. And when I'm as Al-Anons, all I want to do is be in my head all day. This is all I want to do all day. Head, head, head. And I have to learn that the body doesn't lie. And that when I'm in my body and I can feel things and be vulnerable, that it's such a better way to communicate. And it's actually easier for me to see the ego that way. Um, I don't know why, but it is. But yeah, and the 10th, I mean, helping others is the foundation stone. It's like for me, it always goes back to that. It's like, am I helping enough? What am I doing? When's the last time, I went out and carried the message? When's the last time I went to a treatment center or something and tried to find a family member to help? Like it always just comes back to the basic stuff. It just does. So
Any other questions? If not, I have a quick one. Joy, when you talked about that freedom from having to keep your hands on your alcoholic and in that period of time where you were saying that things were crazy, but you were able to not interfere. Was that when did you realize that that had happened? Was that kind of looking back in the rearview mirror, or was it attached to kind of a certain step where you felt that freedom, or when you started helping people, or?
I don't think I knew I understood it until my husband got sober, because I could see like how badly I was in the way. Like it was so obvious. And then it was like, oh, look what happens when I get out of God's way. Like people get sober. Like so that was, I think, really the light bulb. But the freedom always for me came from helping other people. That was the only way I was able to shut my mouth and not do the stuff I always had done. So
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and close it down. Every group ought to be self-supporting. And thank you for everybody who came and attended this meeting. We will have the recordings, as it does say in the chat. I put that up there. But so every group ought to be self-supporting, declining outside contributions. This group does not have a payment structure in place and currently has no overhead expenses. If you would like to fulfill Tradition 7, please send your contributions directly to the Al-Anon World Service Office by visiting alanon.org. For questions about this meeting, or if you are looking for a sponsor, please send emails to alanonbigbookrecovery@gmail.com. That's alanonbigbookrecovery@gmail.com. And then again, the recordings for these types of meetings that we are putting on can be found on YouTube by typing in @Al-Anon Step Speaker in the YouTube search box. We also have it on Spotify at Al-Anon Step Speaker Series. If you're interested in other Al-Anon meetings that follow the Big Book, please visit alanonbigbooksolutiongroup.org. Now let's have a moment of silence for the Al-Anon who still suffers, followed by the Lord's Prayer or a prayer of your own choosing, said in silence. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording.